Welcome to Start Writing. I'm Joe Bendosky. This week I have an interview with fellow podcaster and full-time writer Sarah Werner. She'll talk about how she went full-time, how she built the networks and the different income streams to enable her to do that. She'll also talk about using sound and verbs to build out the setting and just create a manuscript that is more alive and detailed without actually adding extra word to the text. This week in critiques, there's a member in my group. She's a great writer, and one of the real strengths of her writing is that she's very funny, and she often talks about her family and stories from her growing up. And in this past week, she brought a piece, and she had mentioned to us that it was the first story she'd ever written, at least as an adult, outside of school. And she'd gone through and revised it and polished it many times over the years. So she brought it, and she was reading it through, and the other members of the group had little things. Maybe it's a little flat here, a little bit of word repetition here, just smaller things. But for the most part, they just really enjoyed the story. And when it came to me, I told Sandra, do a complete rewrite. And the reason for that is that she, her family is Italian, and she was talking about the differences between the Italian, the Italian-American, the American-Italian. And eventually she whittles this down to her own family and her personal experiences there. And one of the reasons I had recommended the full rewrite is because in these grand discussions of ethnic groups of the Italian-American, the American-Italian, there weren't really any central characters at play, and they didn't come in until the second or maybe even the third page when she started to talk about her actual family. And as Lisa Crone puts it, the protagonist is the lens by which the reader feels. Indeed, so what the protagonist feels, the reader feels. And what that does is it enables writers to control the roller coaster of emotions. And without that control, the emotional ride of the story can be flat because there's nothing directing that. And so I had recommended that she rewrite the whole thing so that we could have a central character step on the stage from the very beginning. I recommended she start with her dad or her grandfather. And instead of saying just Italian Americans in general, start with her dad or her grandfather, who was one, and start there. There are a lot of other reasons I'd recommend the rewrite. One is that Sandra and I have been in a group for a couple years now, and I'm very familiar with her work and what she can do, and I just didn't feel like it was her strongest piece, which was another reason for the rewrite. But that's harder to communicate the specifics of how you would look for that. Even I would have a harder time breaking it down. But the idea of having that protagonist character enter early on is an important one, and that's what I wanted to address this week in critiques, is that once you have the protagonist, you can direct the emotional roller coaster of the reader. And that is what will enable you to give them a good ride. This week in Writing True, I want to look at writing better. One of the things I've been studying as I'm working on my current manuscript is what's called the nothing habit. What is the thing that you do as a habit when you have nothing else to do, when your mind is bored, or when your hands have nothing to do, let's say you're waiting in line, etc. And what makes the nothing habit powerful is that it soaks up all the free time we have because it is the nothing habit. If we have free time, it soaks it up. And so as I've been studying this, my thought was if you can teach yourself the habit of writing in that nothing habit so that your go-to is, I'm bored, I have nothing to do, or I'm just kind of in between activities, immediately you go to the writing. And so I thought that was just an important connection as a way of getting more writing done. But yeah, so looking at what is the nothing habit that you have now. When you have nothing to do, or you just finish working on something and you're about to start another one, what fills that emptiness? And try to shift it so that it is writing that fills that emptiness. Welcome to the Start Writing podcast. Today, my guest is Sarah Werner. She is the host of the Right Now podcast, which is about finding more time to write and filling in those gaps. Her most recent episode talked about traveling and being able to get in writing while you're doing that. And she talks about just inspiring and motivating authors and just helping them approach writing in a very positive way so that they don't cower from the overwhelming challenge that is a novel or any other project you're approaching that way.
Yes.
She writes a lot of articles. She's a contributor to Forbes where she talks about podcasting a lot. And she also does a lot of ghost writing. So she can't mention any specific books that she's done in that realm, but she can talk about some of the techniques and how she found the work there. So welcome, Sarah.
Well, thank you so much, Joseph. I'm so excited to be here today.
So I guess in the beginning, I actually want to talk about the work of fiction that you're working on. In what realm are you writing? What's your genre? Who's your target audience? And as you've been writing for a long time and are writing full time right now, I assume that you have done a fair amount of research before you dove into this. So talk to us about that.
Oh gosh, yes. I think that I and many other writers will tell you that my entire, childhood, my entire life has all been research for writing. And so basically, my newest work is an audio drama. It's a fictional podcast, and it's called Girl in Space, and it's sort of a sci-fi confessional. And it kind of came out of the fact that the reason I started my other podcast right now was working backward. I had initially started a blog. As a writer, I was like, oh, obviously I'm going to have a blog and I'm going to write and I'm going to publish books and I'm going to follow this traditional path. And I was, at the time, I was working as a marketer, a digital marketer. And I was like, you know what? There's so many cool ways now to tell stories. And anybody with a platform online is sort of a storyteller. And so can I experiment a little bit with how this whole thing works, with how storytelling works online? And so my blog quickly turned into the Right Now podcast, and the novel that I had been working on for some time very slowly evolved into the Girl in Space audio drama project. And it's just been very interesting to see just sort of the different response that each format gets. There's very different yet very similar audiences for writing and podcasts. And I guess that could be a whole show, just on its own. I guess audience-wise, it's anyone who enjoys science fiction, but also people who don't enjoy science fiction. That was kind of my hope, was to get people into the genre because I love it so much. And now I'm just rambling. So, what am I missing?
Okay. So, on your site, I was reading a selection, which I thought was really well written. Is that the source material for Girl in Space, or is that a different project?
That is a different project. So that is,
so
yes.
We'll deal with that later.
Oh, good. Okay. Okay. Perfect.
Okay. So talk to me about the difference in writing standard fiction versus writing Girl in Space. Is there anything you're approaching differently because it's an audio format?
Absolutely, yes. So I jump into things blind, and I wouldn't get anything done if I didn't do this, because like you said earlier, the process of creating a project is so daunting if you know how much work goes into it. So I decided that I was going to create this audio drama, and I basically did what maybe I should not have done, and I didn't look at how to do it. I was like, I'm just going to jump in and do this. And,
wow.
Well, and on top of that, the fact that I had never written a script before. So I've been writing, stories and novels, short fiction, poetry my entire life. And I'm fairly familiar with how you go about crafting one of those. But I was like, screenplay? ? And I know, thousands of listeners right now who know how to write scripts are cringing and maybe throwing Rotten Tomatoes at whatever they're listening on right now, because I'm the worst. But I was like, I'm just gonna go for it. So it was very, very different. One of my favorite things to write has always been dialogue, so I think that worked in my favor, because essentially it's nothing but dialogue. So that was kind of good and interesting. I noticed that a lot of the storytelling is done without words, which was unique and interesting for me as a writer. What do you mean by that? Storytelling is done without words. So what do you mean by that? Definitely. So there's a lot of things that happen beneath the surface. And so noting that a character, you can't say like she frowned, or you can't say he looked at her with longing. I mean, because it's a podcast, so you have to convey this somehow without saying like, why, Daniel, are you looking at me with great longing right now? And why? Please expound. So like, you can't say stuff like that. So it has to come out in the dialogue, or it has to come out in the music. That is something that I had to learn 100%, just new, was setting moods with music, setting moods with sound effects. I had decided I would do, because I'm ridiculous, I decided I would do all of my own audio editing and sound design, which maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but I did it. And boy, was that a lesson in storytelling without words. It was very humbling. It was uniquely fascinating. It was like putting together a puzzle, but you couldn't see the puzzle pieces. It was just absolutely a new experience for me. And so that it's just been, it's been very eye-opening. It's been very exciting and very fun, and a fun new challenge for me. So.
Okay, so I have a question as to why you chose, I guess it's a radio play format is what you're writing in here.
Yes.
So you've been a writer, and you're writing a book of fiction. So why go with the radio play format? Because I think enough people are familiar with audiobooks that you could have gotten away with that, being like, I'm just going to write the book and put up chapters in the audio. So why that choice?
What a wonderful question. I can't say 100% that I know. But I can tell you what tipped the scale for me. And that was, so I talk with writers all day long, and I work with writers, and I write books, and I see the struggles that come out of publishing. And I see people frustrated. I see people paying a lot of money to do vanity publishing. I see people who self-publish and maybe don't get the traction that they hoped that a traditionally published book would. And I see how difficult it is to get a book traditionally published. And so I said, you know what? I have all of this podcasting equipment. And I saw what happened when I stopped blogging and started turning my blog into an audio project. I wonder if I can get that same ratio of boost to a fictional story that I could with my blog. And surprisingly, it's worked, ? I don't know. I think that there's such a rich and interesting space that needs to be filled. If we're talking about going where the audience is, there's just this untapped potential in audio drama right now. And especially, releasing them as podcasts. There's not a ton of audio dramas out there, but there is a huge listener base that wants more and more good writing. And so I said, wow, so I could either struggle and push this novel among, however many billions of novels are out there, or I can create a unique listening experience, with hopefully what's good writing, in a marketplace that's a lot less saturated.
Huh. Okay. So you said something really interesting here, and that is you were looking at the book market, and it was a little bit saturated, and so you wanted to go audio. And then you mentioned that you had seen a big change when you had taken the blog audio. Talk to me about that. I'm very curious.
Yeah.
So what happened when you took the blog into audio?
Yeah. And that's a great question. I love to talk about this. So when I started podcasting, it was back in 2014. And this is kind of when I started the blog, when I was starting to transition into the podcast. At the time, there were, I want to say, 500 million active blogs. Just process that number for a second. 500 million active blogs, compared to 250,000 podcasts. So that ratio is something like 2,000 to 1. So for every podcast, there are 2,000 blogs. So I said, if I want to stand out, this is how I can do it. I had a little bit of an advantage. I was a woman podcasting, and at the time it was something like 17% of podcasters were women. Like, it was just ridiculously low. And so I said, wow, that's another way I can stand out. I'm a female podcaster, and I'm in this space talking about writing. There's not a ton of writing podcasts. And so I went from getting, oh gosh, each one of my blog posts had 3 or 4 readers. It was really pathetic. It was really sad. It was very disheartening. When I launched the podcast, I had a significant uptick. I think my first episode had a couple hundred listens. And I said,
wow,
oh my.
What were you doing?
Well, I know. Well, right. I think there's a lot to be said. You know, earlier you asked me about audiences. I think there's a lot to be said about where are you releasing your work? Where are you releasing your writing? So this wasn't necessarily the same thing as blogging. When I do my podcast, I just write down, you know, essentially a thesis statement, 3 or 4 points that I want to hit, and then just any notes that I need to cover, thanking people, etc. But in a way, you're still creating something that has to do with words. And so it kind of scratches that creative itch, but it just does it in a space, where I think there was a need. So I kind of wanted to see if I could, replicate that experience, with audio drama. And I think so far it's done quite well. My first episode, came out last Monday, and we just hit 10,000 downloads for that episode this morning. I know that if I published a book, there's no way I would experience that kind of reach right away, right?
Yeah. Wow, that's brilliant.
And I know, like, okay, so that being said, I feel like, so I spent several years of my career in marketing, and I went in with the thought that marketing is evil, and I'm selling my soul, and I'm literally the worst person who has ever walked the earth. I should be creating art for the sake of creating art. And I still think marketing is evil in a way, you know, when it's used to manipulate, when it's used to sell things that people don't really need. But there's a good side of marketing, and that is asking good questions about who is interested in your work, who wants to read your work, who can benefit from reading your work, right? And where is there space where your work can be seen? And I think that that's the valuable side of marketing, and I think that definitely helped.
Huh. Yeah, well, I mean, having a marketing background, I mean, I think every writer out there wishes they had that now, except for the guys who are, you know, the babies of the big publishing companies.
Yeah, they're quite fortunate. We'll just let them enjoy that.
Yeah. So, all right, that's great. Okay, so talk to me about some of the other writing that you're doing. You write a lot of articles, and you do some ghostwriting. So tell me about how that goes to, I guess, support you financially to write the things you want to write.
Oh my gosh, what a great question. So I actually, I left my full-time job as a digital marketer back in April of 2017. So I've been on my own about, I don't know how many months that is because I can't count while talking. So a few months. And before I did that, I worked for about a year building up a client base of people whom I could, write for. So it kind of runs a spectrum. I always say if you want to become a paid writer or a freelance writer, you want at least 5 to 7 income streams if you actually want to do this and support yourself. So you want 5 to 7 income streams, and that can be from different clients. And that can be, different projects for one client, whatever that ends up being. One of the clients can be yourself. You know, if you can find a way, if you're using Patreon to support your writing, if you have, you know, maybe you're doing it old fashioned and you actually have a patron who is paying you to write novels for them. I don't know. Ghostwriting is one of those for me. Writing for Forbes is one of those for me. I have several other clients who I do website writing and marketing writing for. So I just make sure that I have an array of different people that I'm writing for, just so that you're not reliant. Your eggs aren't in one basket, so to speak, for just one client, just in case something goes wrong, or if they decide that they want to, you know, part ways with you, you're not totally screwed. What else can I say about that that's helpful?
Well, my big question here is it worth it? Because you're still working for someone else, not, I mean, you have your novel and you have your Girl in Space, which sound like these are your really dream projects. And then you're doing all this other stuff that, yes, it's writing, but it's not the writing you want to do. Is it worth it?
Absolutely. It is so absolutely 100% worth it. And I feel a little bad saying that, but at the same time, I don't, because it's true. I think it takes a certain personality type to step away from the corporate world and decide, I'm going to be a freelance writer. You have to be comfortable doing not only the writing, but the administrative tasks and the networking and the selling. So you have to be comfortable doing those things. But maybe this is just me. I have a difficulty or a dislike of authority. Basically, I don't like other people telling me what to do, and I never have. I never, ever have.
That's why it's worth it.
This is why it's worth it for me, because, okay, so flashback, I remember this so vividly. I remember taking SATs, and I think this is something that every person who has been through high school can identify with. I remember sitting there taking my SATs, and about halfway through, I just sat there staring at the test, and I said, I really don't want to sit here and prove to somebody else how smart I am. And I just decided I was done. And I was a stupid high schooler, and I probably shouldn't have done that. I know that now, but I don't like being told what to do. And so it was a good fit with my personality that I struck off on my own to do this. The other thing is I can work from anywhere. My husband and I went to Vancouver, and just kind of hung out and did our work. And so we were still making income while we were on vacation, which was nice. Gosh, I just have so much to say about this. There's a degree of scalability. So once you build yourself up as an expert, you stop charging so much per word or per hour, and you start saying, I'm going to create this project for you, and this is how much I'm charging for it. So there's a little bit of niceness there, where then you can do a project that takes a week and then live off of that income for a month. So then those other 3 weeks of the month, you can do your passion projects. So that's how I'm able to do Girl in Space and work on my novel and create the Right Now podcast is, I'm able to kind of support myself that way. There's no clock to punch in and out of. I'm not getting paid for my time. I'm getting paid for the expertise that I bring to my clients. I'm getting paid for the value of the work that I'm bringing in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because I feel like I'm just rambling about starting your own business now and getting very into it. The other thing is like I said, there's flexibility. I'm leaving town for 10 days. I would never be able to ask off 10 days of work from an employer, but I can do that, and I can go stay with a family member and, help take care of them for 10 days, but also not let any of my work fall under the table. So, it absolutely is so worth it. You asked about, you're still essentially working for other people, right? You're still, you still go to somebody and they say, hey, write this blog post about this. And you say, yes, sir. And you write the blog post. There's still something really nice there about being able to choose your clients, and say, no, thanks. I don't think you're a great fit. So there is that. And then there's the fact that it's very empowering, and it's a little bit different. I'm not writing for someone else to make someone else rich, right? I'm writing for someone else to build up my own savings or to purchase something. So there's just a little bit of a mindset difference there too.
So I do want to go into craft a little bit.
Yes.
So on your website, I dug up this little expert. Now I'm not going to read the whole thing chronologically. I'm going to pick a few sentences that I kind of want to focus on, and then I want to talk to you about it.
Yeah. Okay. This is weird. So yeah.
This is weird. Okay. So this is from the novel she's working on, but it is not out yet.
Correct. Yes.
We're out Bretta's apartment in another 5 minutes, clomping up the concrete stairs to the 9th floor. I dial her number again as Dom pounds on the door. Neither elicits a response. The door creaks open, and I fall silent. Though my heart thuds with the force of Kyla's subwoofer, the inside of the apartment is dark. Cappuccinos at the dated granite-topped island. And what I really thought was just interesting and really well done here is if we look at your verbs, clomping, pounds, creaks, thuds, and even dated, these are these verbs you've chosen. They're deeper than just the basic action. But if we look at the top, 1, 2, 3, the first 4, not only is it a description of what's happening, there is a sound associated with each of these verbs. So it's building out this setting more than just visually what's happening here. And so I just really admired the way you had built that into your writing.
Well, thank you.
So why don't you talk to me about your approach to writing, where you're putting in these very detailed, effective action verbs, how you learned it, how you teach it?
Yeah. And that's a great question. It's one of those things that, again, this speaks to what you and I were speaking about earlier on my show, about how important it is to have someone else look at and critique your writing, not only so that they can help you grow and learn and fix mistakes, but so they can help you see your own work with new eyes. So thank you. I appreciate this. I am a huge believer in what I call 5 senses writing. And I want to make sure, not necessarily on a granular level, like with every sentence or every paragraph, but I want to make sure that in every scene, I'm engaging all of your senses. So there's, like you said, in the section you read, there's just a very heavy audio element. Like, I'm hearing this as we go, and they're very purposefully deep sounds. They're very forceful. They're very troubling. And you do that on purpose. So I like to make sure that I have not only the visual component covered, but I want to make sure that readers are experiencing the audio, the taste, the smell, all of these different elements of a scene. I think that really helps people, I guess I hate using the word engage with, but I'm going to use it. Engage with the scene and feel like they're really taking action in the story that you're making.
Okay, so you mentioned one thing here that I'm curious about. How do you incorporate taste into a scene?
So
we did an episode on this, but even walking away from the episode, I didn't feel like I had a strong hold on it.
I think the question is, what does taste mean to you? Right? And for some people, it's not really far removed from smell, right? You can say like the air smelled like smoke, or but I like to think like, what do I taste from day to day? And it takes a certain degree of empathy to put yourself in your character's shoes and imagine yourself standing there, say in this apartment. What am I tasting right now? Am I tasting something literal? Am I tasting like, oh, I'm, eating some Sour Patch Kids. And so, it's scraping off the top layer of my tongue and all I taste is this sour blood taste. Or am I tasting, is bile rising in my throat? Am I tasting regret? What's going on biologically in my body? And that does not answer your question at all, I think. Because I just got on a tangent there. Can you rephrase? Can you ask me that again?
What are some of the things you do to incorporate a taste into a scene? As I find that to be the most difficult of the 5 senses to incorporate. Definitely.
So I use taste sparingly, and I only incorporate it when I think it would be weird. Taste is
Hang on.
Yes.
Talk to me about that.
Yes.
Only incorporate it when it would be weird. Let's go there.
Yes. Okay. So, first and foremost, this might be because I'm a genre writer. So I write mostly science fiction, horror, speculative fiction, that kind of stuff. And I like to have a very, like I said earlier, I like to have a very sensual element to what I'm writing to the sense that I like to engage all 5 senses. And so I like to use taste when it's jarring. And for me, that means, taste we take for granted, right? We're always tasting something. Like, smack your lips right now. You're probably tasting something, whether it's the remnants of your lunch or just the weird natural taste of your own mouth. But if you really want to drive something home, you have to make it unexpected. So earlier in my novel, and this is not part of the excerpt that you read, and it's not available on the website, but, earlier, the main character is sitting in a police department, and she's drinking this terrible coffee. And she just says, the coffee tastes like a wet paper bag in my mouth. And it's like, if you've ever had bad coffee, like that's exactly what it tastes like to me. Maybe it tastes like something different to you, but like, it's not the coffee tasted like coffee. I never use taste as to say something that's obvious. I use taste to add an extra sensory element to what I'm writing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I agree, like it's hard to work taste in. And so I only throw in maybe a few very strong details here and there.
Okay. So talk to me about what you consider the strongest part of your own writing, and how was it you went about developing that?
My favorite thing to write, and I'm not ever sure if our favorite thing and our strongest thing are the same. I think they maybe tend to be. But where I find the most joy when I'm writing is in dialogue. I love when two characters talk to each other. I love when they engage with each other. I love when they reveal different things about each other to each other, and when they reveal things about themselves to themselves. I just think that that's so fascinating. I love doing it. I love listening to people. I was an introvert, and maybe I don't sound like it now, but I'm incredibly shy. And so I spent a lot of time growing up listening to people talk and hearing how they, how they respond to each other, how they digest what the other person says, how they react to it. And so that's one of my absolute favorite things to write, in fiction.
And what's something you're developing in your own craft now, and how are you going about that?
I'm learning how to write scripts. Because I need to. I crack myself up. So something that I'm working on right now is boiling down a script into the essentials. It's very easy to have fun writing and to take great delight in putting in beautiful details and meaningful signs. And then once you're done, you have to look at it and say, what's really necessary here? And I think there's maybe a wider berth for it in fiction. But I feel like when you're writing for the ear, when you're writing something that will be acted out or something that will come forth in audio, you have to be very sparing. You have to be a little bit more respectful of the listener's time. And so you can't kind of ramble on like I'm doing right now. You have to be very, very sparse and to the point, but do it in a way that still sounds natural. So I'm kind of having fun exploring that right now.
So is there anything that, let's say you pick up a book and in the first few pages, if it's something a writer is doing, you're just like, I can't stand it? No.
Yes.
Anything that drives you crazy?
Yes. And that is unnatural dialogue. It drives me insane. And this is something that I focus on because I focus on it in my own writing, but it's not impossible to write good dialogue, and it's not impossible to get better at writing dialogue if you're not super great at it. And that is, read it out loud with a friend. And if you feel silly, then it's probably not great. Like, the absolute best thing you can do, and you can do this for non-dialogue too, one of the best things you can do for your writing is read it out loud to somebody, or even read it out loud to yourself and say, does this taste right? Like, are these words working together? If there's an audiobook version, is this going to sound really stupid? Is this how people really talk? And you have to be honest with yourself, because sometimes the answer is no, that's not how people talk, and you need to go through and workshop that. So yes, I love good dialogue that's also natural sounding.
Okay, so I guess this is going to be kind of a slant question here.
Oh boy.
So with your book, what publishing route do you plan to take? I mean, looking at your podcast, both of them, it seems like you have done very well in marketing yourself, and audiobook is definitely an option to look at, particularly since you've done so well in the audio realm. So what are your plans for the publishing of your book?
What a great question. If you would have asked me 10 years ago, I would have said my hope and dream is to be picked up by the big five, right? But now that there's like hybrid publishing, and now that self-publishing is becoming a little bit less stigmatized, absolutely. I feel very, very fiercely now about being an indie writer and really just owning every step of the way and saying, yeah, you know what? I don't need to pay, whatever % of my income from this book to a publishing house. I made this. It's mine. I'm going to market it. So I think that's, self-publishing is in my future. And I think that self-audiobook creation, I don't even know if that's a term, is in my future as well. So, it's just empowering.
Are you the VO on Girl in Space?
I am. Okay. I am and to its detriment, perhaps, but it's just been a fun experiment.
Because I mean, with my own books, I create an audiobook, but it is not the audiobook. But that's how I tapped my beta readers. Just because I found out early on, if I sent out manuscripts to 20 people, maybe one would read it.
Oh my gosh, but yes.
If I sent out audiobooks to 20 people, 18 would read it, and then I would get like 10 referrals.
Dude, that's brilliant.
So when for a beta reading, I send out audio because I get a much better response, and a lot of other people are willing to do it that I don't even ask. But that's not the audiobook. I go through a professional producer, and even in our show at one time, we took the audiobook that my producer put out and said, you can compare this against my reading. Now, they're not verbatim because the audiobook was a beta version and a lot of changes happened. But you can kind of see that he is at a whole another level than I am. But it was an effective technique in getting beta readers.
What a wonderful idea. I'm just in awe of this great idea.
Oh yeah, because I like I said, I'd had a lot of books that I decided not to publish because they were awful, but I was having a really hard time getting beta readers, and so I was like, let me try this, see what happens, and it worked really, really well.
Boy, I really admire that you did that. I really admire that you kind of opened up yourself to this critique and said, "Here, world, what do I say?" That's just great.
Let's see what else. Okay, so maybe talk to me about some of the marketing that you're doing for your podcast, and more specifically, what's the marketing you're doing for Girl in Space, as that has kind of an audiobook feel to it that is doing so well?
What a good question. Gosh, and where to begin? I want to begin with two things. This could also be its very own like hour-long talk, but I want to focus on two things here. That is, number one, your website. And number two, your ability to go out and shake hands with people. And
what the?
Yeah. Yep. And so number one, your website. I don't know. People create content. So maybe you're blogging, maybe you're writing things, maybe you have a presence on Goodreads, or maybe you have an Amazon site. You need something out there that you as a writer own. You need a platform that you own. And this is a trust signal that goes out to agents and publishers. This is a trust signal that goes out to your readers. This is sort of your home base. You need a digital home base. A lot of writers say, Sarah, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, that's good enough. And I say, no, it's not, because you don't own Facebook and you don't own Twitter. You don't own Instagram, right? If one of these platforms goes away tomorrow, where does your audience go to find you? Right? So you need a place online that you own, that your audience can go to and find you. And it can be simple. It can be one page. You can have your picture on the top or not. If you're not comfortable having your picture, you can just have a flower or the cover of your book or the aspirational cover of your book, what have you. But just make sure that you have yourname.com or yourname-author.com. That is one of the best marketing things you can do. You can also get fancy and start measuring traffic and do SEO and all of that good stuff. And that's part of, I think, what led to the success of Girl in Space. I built the website. That was one of the very first things that I did months and months and months before I launched. I had my digital home base out there. And so if anyone asked me, what's this project you're working on? I would say, go to girlinspacepodcast.com, and it would link off to all of my social media. It linked off to my Patreon. There was a countdown for when the launch would happen. So it's a great idea to have a digital home base that you own. So, you can use Squarespace, Wix, WordPress. There's free and paid options. Just have a website. The second thing I'm going to do is say something that's very uncomfortable for most writers, and for the majority of my career was very uncomfortable for me. And that is a willingness to sit down and talk with real human beings one-on-one. It's super awkward. It's super uncomfortable, but it is the most necessary thing that you can do.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm a vaguely successful writer, and I write full time for a living. Every single one of my writing jobs that I have right now, every single one that I've ever had in the past, and every single one probably that I will have in the future came from a human being who had met me in person.
Huh.
You can go out to ProBlogger, you can go out to Readsy, you can go out there and put your name out there and say, hey, I'm a writer, hire me. And you might get some traction, but you will not get a career. You won't get the career that you want if you're not willing to say, hey, so-and-so, can I buy you a cup of coffee? I'd love to tell you about my writing services. That cup of coffee, that handshake, that eye-to-eye contact, that's 100%, the reason that I've been able to write for a living. And I know it sounds weird. It sounds like Sarah, that can't be the reason, but it is. It establishes trust with people. It lets people in your immediate community know that you are available as a writer. And you should absolutely be doing it. So there was a time when I would go to people who I admired in town and I would say, hey, I'm Sarah, I'm a writer. I would love to treat you to a cup of coffee. And most of the time they would say yes. And that stupid cup of coffee was like my ticket to my writing career.
So I guess you mentioned people you admired in town. Where else are you meeting these people? I mean, because I mentioned I podcast, I write, I work night shifts. I can go weeks without really meeting no, that's not true. I can go months without meeting a new person, I can go weeks without even really talking to anyone.
Definitely. I get really involved in my community and maybe this is sort of you make your own luck stepping ladder kind of thing, but, I'm very active in my church. I'm very active with several boards and volunteer organizations in town. And so, it's sort of I don't want to use the word networking because I hate networking the same way that I hate marketing, but I also realize its value.
You were a marketer.
I know, but I hate it. But it's so freaking useful, And the same is true for networking. So networking has this horrible connotation of sleazy dudes in suits, trading business cards and being catch you on the golf course. It's awful and I hate it and I hate small talk. But if you can translate the way you think about networking to making meaningful connections within your community, then that's when you begin to start building your name. That's when you begin to build local trust. So you need local trust and you need digital trust. Your website gives you digital trust. Your presence in your community gives you local trust. So you need to be willing to go out there and shake hands and just be willing to put yourself out there.
Very cool. Okay. So we talked about publishing. All right. Why don't you tell people where they can find you and your work and connect to everything you're doing?
Awesome. You can find me at my website, sarahwerner.com. That's SARAHWERNER.com. That's where everything lives that I'm doing. You can find links to the Right Now podcast, WRITE now, because, we're writers and we write now. Sort of similar to Joseph's Start Writing podcast. I also have my new audio drama project, Girl in Space, and you can find that either at sarahwerner.com or at girlinspacepodcast.com. It's also out there on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, etc., etc. Otherwise, I'm on all the social mediums. What's the plural? Social media. I don't know. I'm out there too.
Okay. This was great. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. I hope I didn't go on too long. I do tend to ramble.
You're actually shorter than some of our interviews. We don't have a set time.
Okay, good.
Whatever it is, it is. I mean, if there's a lot of good stuff, then we keep it all and play the whole thing.
Wonderful. Well, Joseph, thank you so much for this opportunity. I love being able to talk to your listeners. This has just been absolutely delightful, and I cannot wait to go pick up my copy of When the Sky Falls.
All right, that was our interview with Sarah Werner. I am going to attach some of her audio drama, Girl in Space, at the end of this episode if you want to check it out. In the meantime, feel free to sign up for our mailing list. For giveaways, what we're going to do is we are just going to go through everyone on the mailing list, and then someone will be chosen to get a $20 gift card to Amazon. I'm going to try and expand on the newsletter a little bit, so I'll pull the highlights out of the interviews, and I'm going to put those in the newsletter, and then maybe try to get more links to the people we interview. So if you want to check out their stuff, their websites, and whatnot, you'll be able to just click through that really easily in there. Because I know a lot of times for me, there's stuff I want to click on and check out and whatnot with people who get interviewed. But then I get home and I'm like, oh, I can't even remember their name. So that, for me, that's a good reason to be signed up for a newsletter is, you know, when the newsletter shows up at the end of the month, I can be like, oh yeah, we interviewed that guy. These are some of the highlights. I wanted to check out this blog post by him, or I wanted to check out his book. So, you know, that's my recommendation. If that's something that interests you, sign up for the newsletter and we'll send you that. And like I said, I'm going to try and maybe expand our emphasis on the guests a little bit more. And I'm going to try and expand the blog so I do a little more detailed posts so that particularly as we do our craft episodes and our marketing episodes, you can go to the blog and skim through if there was a detail you missed and wanted to really look at. So gonna be expanding the newsletter a little bit that way. We're not gonna be pushing the giveaways as elaborate as we used to. Just if you're on the list, you'll be part of the giveaway. And as always, if you enjoy the show, check out one of our books and leave us a review. That is the best way to show us you like the podcast and are interested. That is the thing Travis and I like doing most with our time is working on our books. And it's the reason we started the podcast. So yeah, check those out. And as always, thanks for listening.
You think sometimes that you're all alone. But wherever you are, whoever you are, you're wrong. It's Girl in Space. You said, on the last day I ever saw you, not to worry. That I'd see you again. Part of me wants to forgive you for lying to me. I mean, you couldn't have known. But part of me, to be honest, part of me is still kind of bitter, even after all these years. Not because you left, but because you left me alone. Wow. You'd think I would know better than to go through my old diaries. Nothing there but teenage heartache and angst, and a lot of really terrible poetry. Though, they're a lot more interesting than my current diaries. Speaking of which, according to the dash, it is day 10 mark 303, hour 0837, whatever that means. I mean, I guess I get the meaning of time insofar as is possible for a human mind, and there's a fairly distinct linear progression to my life. I just haven't ever witnessed the apparatus by which they're measured. Days, hours, when there's no rising sun or planetary rotation, these measurements feel kind of arbitrary. I mean, outside of the info here on the dash, they don't mean anything. It's always just me, out here, on the Cavatica, alone. Despite how that sounds, please note that I am super not bitter about it. In fact, I really don't mind being alone. Turns out I like the quiet. It helps me think, and I get a ton of work done. Speaking of which, I think you'd be proud of me. I finally got that old stereo microscope working, and I'm going to use it today to take a better look at those weird little insects that are attempting a hostile takeover of my potato plants. Oh, and I found something while I was going through some of Mom's old stuff. It's weird. I've never seen anything like it before. It's about the size of a button, and, well, I think it actually is a button. Not like the kind you would sew onto a jacket, more like the kind you press to open a door or commit a command. But it's not attached to anything, and I don't think it ever was intended to be. So I'm going to take it apart, and I figured, hey, might as well do so using the stereo microscope. I know. Buttons and microscopes and potato-destroying insects, all before lunch. What can I say? I am a sucker for cheap thrills.